We're going to talk about, does God reward people who are dishonest? I know, interesting, right? Welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. This is my father, Dr. Kaplan. We're going to go through the books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year, a little bit every day. Today we're reading Exodus 1:18 through 2:10. I'm going to be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we will discuss. And the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why do you do this thing and let the children live?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "For not like the Egyptian women are the Hebrew women, for they are hardy. Before the midwife comes to them, they give birth." And God made it go well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very vast. And inasmuch as the midwives feared God, he made households for them. And Pharaoh charged his whole people, saying, "Every boy that is born you shall fling into the Nile, and every girl you shall let live." And a man from the house of Levi went and took a Levite daughter, and the woman conceived and bore a son. And she saw that he was goodly, and she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took a wicker ark for him, and caulked it with resin and pitch, and placed the child in it, and placed it in the reeds by the banks of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to see what would be done to him. And Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the Nile, her maidens walking along the Nile. And she saw the ark amidst the reeds, and sent her slave girl, and took it. And she opened it up, and saw the child, and look, it was a lad weeping. And she pitied him, and said, "This is one of the children of the Hebrews." And his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and summon a nursing woman from the Hebrews, that she may suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the girl went and summoned the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Carry away this child and suckle him for me, and I myself will pay your wages." And the woman took the child and suckled him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became a son to her, and she called his name Moses, for from the water I drew him out. So we have a couple of stories here. We have the conclusion of the midwives, and we have the story of Moses' mother and the ark. Okay, so going back to our question, right? Does God reward liars? The question that often puzzles people in the story is that when Pharaoh is asking the midwives, why do you let the children live? And the midwives give this response, which seems dishonest. In response to that, God actually blesses them. So there's a couple of things to unpack here. I don't know if you want to get started. I have some theories about what's going on.
I'll give you a better one.
Uh-oh.
God reward Phineas, who exterminated 2 people.
Well, true. That's true.
The situation here is that, first of all, I think this statement that they made, whether you want to call it deception or not, I'm not sure that Pharaoh took this just that we're simply not going to be able to obey this commandment. We just can't do it. And this was more or less an excuse, and he knew it. And so he decided, well, I still need them maybe to help with the deliveries of Egyptian women as well. And so I won't get rid of them, but I'll just throw the babies into the river. That's the easiest way to handle it. And I'll let the Egyptians do it. Since the Israelites don't want to destroy their own, I'll go to my own people and let them do it. In other words, Pharaoh spared them, but I'm not sure he took this that seriously. I think he just took this as their excuse for insubordination, and so he came up with Plan B.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. The first question is, was this even dishonest in the first place, right? Because what they actually say is, for the Egyptian women are not like the Hebrew women. They are, the way it's translated here, they are hardy. Before the midwife comes to them, they give birth. This could all be true. It could be that they simply made a deal because they said, "Hey, look, what if they told everybody what was going to happen?" They're like, "Hey, Pharaoh's told us that if a boy is born, we're going to have to kill him." And so they're like, "Okay, well then we're just not going to call midwives anymore." And they were hardy enough people, they were determined enough that they did it without midwives. This could all be true. They're not revealing the full hand exactly, but they could be completely honest in that way.
But
right?
Let's assume it wasn't true. That's a better, let's go, the time may. Let's assume it isn't true.
Well, let's assume it's not true, and that it's like they literally get there and they do help them out, and they're just lying, that they are fast enough that they don't need their assistance? Is that what you're saying? That they really were assisting them and then they're just lying about it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's probably the case.
It could be the case. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be.
And under,
It could be the case that they made a pact to not use midwives, considering midwives were tasked with this.
in
With
old
this.
covenant times, there were just wars,
Fair enough.
so if there's just wars, you can have just dishonesty. I'm not. You have to be careful.
Mhm.
And I'm not using it to talking. I'm not justifying behavior of that sort now, but I'm saying it in the context, the historical context. As I said, Phineas went ahead and exterminated 2 people,
Mhm.
and he was rewarded for that.
Right. Well, I mean, there is the concept of morality in context because it's not as much as we want to say there are hard lines, in some ways they're not because you're often forced between two immoral decisions and you have to pick the lesser. For example, yeah, Sean says if they're lying, it seems like they're trying to save lives. Exactly, right? It says in the Bible, if you know there is good and you don't do it, that is sin, right? So they if they know that the option is either they are dishonest or people are going to die, basically they're being forced between murder and dishonesty, and you can make the case that dishonesty is a lesser sin than murder. And so Pharaoh forced them into a sin, but they really had no choice. There was no way to get out of it without sinning, theoretically. That might be a false dichotomy. You can comment below if you think that's the case. But it's kind of like the old story. It's like for people that are very strict about dishonesty. They'll be like, well, what would you do if a Nazi knocked on your door? And my answer to that is, well, you have two options because you're either going to be responsible for the murder of somebody or you're going to be responsible for the dishonesty to somebody. And in my opinion, dishonesty is a lesser sin than murder. So I am being forced to sin one way or the other, unfortunately, in that situation. That's my thought on it. And that's not the only way to deal with it, but I see different commentators. Some commentators will take the approach that perhaps they were not being dishonest because they don't like the idea of God blessing dishonesty, so they basically turn it into that they weren't. And there's other people that say, well, they were dishonest, but it was really, is there such a thing as ever purity within people, and they kind of get gray, and a lot of decisions are kind of on a scale of some sort. And like to your point, even if they were dishonest, what if they did it in kind of a wink wink nudge nudge way that made it obvious that they kind of were, or Pharaoh really knew it? And there's so many different ways we have of conversations. So what I think we don't need to do, though, and this is where you can go too far off the rails, is just cherry pick this and be like, so therefore, you can kind of have an ends justify the means approach in your speech, because as long as your intentions are moral, dishonesty can be kind of put offside. And that's obviously a horrific slippery slope. That is not the biblical standard. So, any other thoughts?
You're tempting me.
Well, go ahead. Be tempted.
We have a tremendous culture in America right now of dishonesty.
Yes.
It's
No.
like the old Soviet Union.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of problems with.
I won't say anymore.
No. There's a lot of problems with not speaking to reality right now. And actually, I'm going to make the case that, and this is just maybe my bias because I'm really into speaking reality, but I'm going to make the case that Exodus has a lot to do about speaking to reality. That's a big theme of the book. We'll get to that throughout the rest of the week. Just stay tuned on that. So it is interesting, though, that they're only concerned about boys and not women. Obviously, men more likely to rise up and build an army or something like that. But I think the other idea, too, is that in terms of, I mean, obviously it was a male-dominated society with patriarchy, so, men dominated the households and things like that. But there is something to be said about the fact that when women are bearing other men's children, there is just by default a difference of the relationship than the other way around. And I think that's a biological fact, regardless of whether or not you want to support a patriarchal system or not. And I think it's something, again, speaking to reality, you have to be aware of.
I didn't quite follow that.
I think a woman bearing a man's child is just definitively a different relationship than the other way around.
Oh, okay, but
in terms of dominance,
they wanted to absorb the women into their
exactly.
society.
That's my point. Yeah.
And throwing them into the river was in effect an easy
Yeah, an easy
Easy,
way to kill them.
easy way to do it.
It also does speak to some.
Sad to say that.
Yeah,
I remember in Cecil B. DeMille's
they have
version,
them stabbing
he
them.
has them stabbing the children,
Yeah,
and this would have been an easier way to handle it.
right.
Yeah,
Especially when you want to do it in mass. If
yeah,
you'll,
right,
and
yeah,
obviously you can think of horrific situations where
yeah.
people killed in mass, and it tends to be in rather ignominious ways, right?
It's interesting. I'm a baby boomer, so our generation grew up, and that movie was constantly being shown every spring, and
It
people,
still is.
it still is.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I just wonder if it's as much in popular culture as it once was. We've had Prince of Egypt though,
I don't
but
think so though.
Prince of Egypt, the animated feature, I don't. I
They
think
show them drowning.
drowning.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they get that one
more
right.
accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So then we have the so the women conceived for his son, and when she saw he was goodly, she hid him 3 months. So the thing that I think that's important about that is I'm going to assume that he was circumcised, and I have a reason why I want to say that for
Mm,
later this week.
no, I
But I
see.
want to establish at this point, I think Moses was circumcised. I also think that may be why one of the ways that they figured out he was one of the Hebrews later on. But
Okay.
the question, the one thing that's different here than Hebrews is that here it's the husband is not mentioned at all. He is completely missing from the story. It just says a woman bore a son. She saw he was good 3 months. In
Right.
Hebrews, it goes out of the way to say that the man was also involved in this, which
Oh,
of course makes sense, right? That
that's
the husband would
interesting.
have to be involved. But the question is why would Exodus hide this fact? And I think it's just trying to emphasize what I consider to be a positive femininity in terms of the protectiveness of a woman, and I think it doesn't want to undermine that concept. Ultimately, you have it twice. You have the mother of Moses, and then you have the Egyptian mother, and the compassion being used in a very positive way. And I think, and Miriam too. Like you have all these women throughout, and I think it's making a case. It's making a positive case for femininity in light of what you could argue is kind of toxic masculinity to use a bloated term. But Pharaoh's big concern is power, right? Which tends to be where that sort of negative side of masculinity comes from, right? That insecurity that your power will be overtaken, and so he's killing any potential competitor. He won't even be willing to entertain that. He's not strong enough to face them. He's literally going to cut them off, right? And in the meantime, the women are taking compassion. So I think that's cool. I like that.
And even Sipporah later uh, takes initiative and circumcises
Yes, we're gonna get to that.
the
That's
child.
that's
No,
fun.
it's interesting. What you it hit me as you're talking the role of women in the book, the importance of heroic women in the book.
Right, and then we had the birth women, the midwives, right? So this is 4 heroic women in a row.
But this explains to me, to some degree, the Jewish tradition that it was on the merit of the women of Israel that they were redeemed.
Hmm.
That's a famous Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
And the tradition is that the women encouraged the men, frankly, to have sex and to impregnate them. When the men were somewhat depressed or whatever, the women continued. This is the Jewish tradition that they made sure that that the men continued to
Well,
have.
if the idea again was before, it says he made their life difficult. So if the idea is he was going to tire out the men,
Yeah, right.
then I guess the idea was that the women are like, nope, we're not gonna,
Yeah, that
we're gonna keep the race going,
that.
buddy.
But I can understand the underlying spirit of the text is what probably caused them.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not trying to defend every legend, but
No.
I'm saying the ethos of it was that the fact that women are very prominent in this account. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm. Sean has a question. Is this the first instance of adoption in the Bible? Um,
interesting.
kind of, yeah, because you have people being born of servants, right? But I think this is the first time that you have an unattached child being taken on with other parents.
The only
I can't think of another example.
related situation would be that Abraham claimed that he would have to give his servant his inheritance because he didn't have any kids. So that's sort of,
Yeah, it's kind of like giving him a status, but yeah,
but that's because there were no children, and
yeah,
somebody's going to have to inherit it.
Right.
So it would have been a servant.
Yeah.
But that's a good point.
Yeah, it is a good point. Um, and it does obviously give Moses a Christ-like origin story, not a virgin birth, but a detached from the parent birth, right? She is his mother, even though he came from a different circumstance, a different biological circumstance.
There's a relationship to the flood account here.
Mm-hmm.
He's like in a miniature ark
Yep.
on the water,
Right.
and the symbolism of baptism is here.
Yep.
That he comes out of the water. She goes to the Nile to bathe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of implications of baptism here,
Right.
and the Jews pick up on that too in their tradition.
Yeah.
That they say she's coming to immerse herself because she's going to be a convert. I mean, that's going too far. But I
Right.
mean, it just shows again the spirit of the text.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Now, here is something that people postulate about is that what exactly was Moses' mother even thinking? Because it's like she can no longer hide him, so she builds an ark and then she throws him in there and he throws him in the river and it's like what? And then his sister is watching to see what would be done to him, so it's like she's just gonna watch him starve. My thought, and the text doesn't explicitly say,
Right, yeah.
but it does seem like it's possible that his mother was actually being a little bit clever and deliberately sending him out towards the Egyptians where she knew that they might bathe in the river and kind of hoping that this might work out in this sort of way, perhaps. It was a long shot, so I'm not saying there wasn't faith involved. There certainly was faith. I mean, Hebrews says there was faith, right? But I don't necessarily know if it was just kind of a blind faith. Let's just throw the cast of bread upon the waters, but just like I don't even know what's gonna happen, but just possible. It could be that she got a vision or something or some divine insight to do it. It doesn't say that either, so I tend to think it says he was a beautiful child. Yeah, that's an interesting thing too,
Yeah,
right?
right.
She has a sense about Moses, right? And I don't think that's just like he was attractive. I think there is more to that. She had a spiritual sense about him.
Right.
So she thought that there would be importance. But I think that it's possible that this was somewhat thought through, that this wasn't just completely random. This was like a last ditch effort. This was her best attempt to try to deal with the situation. I
Yeah.
tend to like to give characters more agency just because from a narrative I tend to like that, but
Right.
I can't be dogmatic about that being a reason.
I'm trying to see where the parents.
Oh, you went too far. Was hidden 3 months by his parents. Yeah, the author of Hebrews specifically says his parents, not just the
They
mother.
were not afraid of the king's command.
Right. Whereas the Exodus account, like I think one reason why Jews might get a little bit more feminist in a way with their read is that the Exodus count doesn't even talk about his dad, so he almost seems like a little bit of a louse that he wasn't involved. But obviously he could have surrendered or something. How would you hide a baby for 3 months without your husband's
Of
permission?
course. Yeah.
Right. But Hebrews does go out of its way to talk about it because the point of it is different. I think it is emphasizing feminine power in Exodus. I think that is absolutely correct. It's just one after the other, woman, woman,
Now,
woman,
see,
woman.
Cecil B. DeMille again. He emphasized her devoutness. That she tells Miriam, "See where God will lead it."
Yes, which I
So
don't think is
it's not
necessarily
necessarily wrong.
untrue.
No.
I'm just saying that she might have. It's kind of like you step into a situation, you're like, well, I hope God inspires the
Right.
situation, but
Right.
it's not like
Right.
you're just doing completely random things,
Right.
right? So she immediately says this is the one of the children of the Hebrews, and then
There's a couple of factors there.
yes,
Hebrews may have looked a little different than Egyptians,
possibly,
and
yeah,
also who would do this to a baby other than
right,
somebody trying to save his life?
right, and he
The,
might have been circumcised.
yeah, that's another thing. The circumcision would
Yeah,
have been there.
right. Um, and then immediately Miriam,
Now,
it,
by the way, Cecil
yes,
B. DeMille's speculation is that he was wrapped in a cloth that was Israelitish.
yes,
That
the
was his.
Levitical
That's what
clothing.
his
Do you
speculation
know the
was.
pattern of this cloth?
I'd like to make a comment about the etymology here. There are various pharaohs that had the name Mose. There's Tutmose and Amos and various ones. So evidently Mose means child, and so you're a child of a certain god. I think Amos is maybe the child of that god and
Hmm.
Tutmos, but he's just simply Mose. And I think the idea was she named him maybe son, meaning orphan, that we don't know his parents.
Hmm.
I think that's the meaning of the name. However, the writer connects it with a Hebrew word.
Which is Moses, right?
Coincidentally, it worked out, quote unquote, coincidentally, that I drew him out of the water. So, in other words, they put a Hebraic spin on the name. It's an Egyptian name, but it can be connected to a Hebrew etymology as well
Hmm.
from the water I drew him. So it has like a double meaning.
Yep. Now, what's interesting is immediately Miriam comes up and she's like, "So, I happen to know somebody who can nurse this baby. What do you say?" Which is it's often neglected in narratives, and I think it's because, unfortunately, Hollywood types are very concerned with tension, and this kind of does ratchet down the tension a little bit because it's like, wow, how nice that this works out, right? That she gets to nurse her own baby, and it kind of, I'm not saying it minimizes the drama because in my opinion it just moves it a little bit later because ultimately the child grows and then she has to bring him to Pharaoh. So in a sense it's almost as kind of more heartbreaking, right? Because she gets the child back so she can nurse him, and then when he's weaned she has to give him up all over again, which
Yeah,
that's very sad.
she's giving him the life of nobility.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
not saying that it's bittersweet, but I mean
yeah, right,
obviously, and even that though has got to be hard because like she doesn't know what's going to happen to him. He could completely apostate himself. He could,
right,
he's not going to be in their culture anymore.
right.
So
But on
that's,
the other hand, he's not going to be a slave.
no, he's not going to be dead.
He
Yeah,
won't be a slave either.
yeah, he won't be a slave
Right,
either.
yeah, I understand. Bittersweet is a good way to
Right?
put it.
Yeah,
Now, also,
it's a powerful moment that you don't see dramatized.
there's no indication that he didn't know his origin, and in fact, the
We're
historian Josephus
going to get to
is
that
very
later.
clear that he did.
Yeah,
No, but see, the common pop culture in America
I know. We're going to get to that later.
Oh, I'm
Hold that
sorry.
thought.
All right,
Hold that thought.
back away.
Yeah, we're going to get to that tomorrow.
All right, all right. But
But what is also amazing about this
I
is
don't want to be a spoiler. Uh,
not only does his mother get to nurse him, but she gets paid. Isn't that crazy? Like, what a turn of events, right? I will pay your wages.
that's a
Like,
good point.
yeah, like why are you paying? Well, why are you even paying him like them? I think that does show maybe the character of this Egyptian woman, So I'm not
Yeah.
gonna go as far as the Jews and saying she was going to the
No, but you
river to become a monotheist, but on the other hand, she does seem to be
right,
an
right,
ethical person.
right. God found him a good mother,
Yeah, it does
good,
seem like
a
it.
good foster mother, I guess you
Yeah,
could say.
it does seem like it.
I'd like to go back to something that I should have commented on earlier,
All right.
but it says that they built cities Pithom and Ramses.
Yes.
That doesn't mean uh, necessarily that Moses and Ramses were contemporary.
No.
These could be edits from a later time so that you would know where these cities were, or a person could be named like sometimes people are named. I know a guy named Destin, which is a city in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and people are named Tennessee or Tex.
Yeah.
People are named Tex. So it doesn't necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
in other words, the city could precede the ruler Ramses. But so people often take this as Moses being a contemporary of Ramses, which I don't think is the case.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ramses comes later.
Mm-hmm.
The person Ramses comes later, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just say too, it wasn't a name before. I mean, it
What?
may have not been a pharaoh
Yeah,
name,
right.
but it could have been a name.
Right.
Like,
Right. That's true too. Right.
it doesn't necessarily have to be they named after a city. It could just be that's a name that's also a city,
And I would,
Like Hope, Arkansas.
and I was going to mention, that there was a fellow named Tex,
Oh no,
and
I know this story.
they asked him, "Are you from Texas?" He said, "No, I'm from Louisiana, but I didn't want to be called Louise."
So bad,
I'm like,
such a terrible story.
uh,
Oh dear.
uh,
Okay, well, that being said,
uh,
if you want more of that, you can like, subscribe,
uh,
hit the bell, and we will see you. And my dad gave a little spoiler of what we're talking about tomorrow, but we will see you tomorrow.